speaking now, we're seeing pictures in England and Scotland of people embracing, others outside of their household or their kind of bubble. And I think many in Wales are left wondering, why can't we do that? Obviously, we see our rates are as low, if not lower, than many of these other regions of the UK. And this is something we've seen throughout where, we have a lack of a joined up, synchronized policy approach across the 4 nations. And so I think a lot of people will really be missing that. We know we miss physical contact. Of course, it can have beneficial biological, psychological effects. But at the same time, I think, many people are also quite cautious. We see in quite recent surveys, significant proportion of the British public are concerned about news coverage on the Indian variant and what that represents. So I think there's a proportion in Wales who are actually quite comfortable not being able to legally, as it were, hug at this point in time.
We are a nation of cwtches usually, and we love to kind of get in your space, and we kind of like to get up close and find out about people. This has changed everything. It took me some time as we were getting into that to kind of hold back my emotions, the way I behave. So I literally started shutting myself right down to avoid myself getting in any situation where I'd want to hug, kiss, and kind of get up close with somebody. Now we're coming back out of that, and now we're being encouraged in a way to kind of let down a little bit of our guard, apart from obviously not the social distancing aspect. I'm feeling really reluctant. And is that normal, that feeling of hesitancy where I see my mum and my sister, we bubbled up as a family at that household and our household. So we have been around each other. But outside of that, when I see people, like I saw somebody today in the office, haven't seen them a long time, at distance, but immediately we want to hug each other. So we did a virtual kind of reach out and hugged each other. Is that normal?
I mean, that's a great question. I think, we hear a lot about vaccine hesitancy at the moment. I think what you're referring to is hugging hesitancy. I think a lot of people are really reluctant to take that plunge and have their first hug outside of their, extent or their household or extended household. We talk about rusty hugging. And I think one of the things that we found throughout this pandemic is how quickly and remarkably people have adapted to the new normal of being socially distant. And of course, we're talking about more than 12 months now, really 14 months of being in this mindset of, well, other people pose us a risk, particularly where, to use a kind of an everyday phrase, we don't know where they've been. We don't know if people have been vaccinated potentially or are carrying a variant. And so we do hear a lot in the media about, and, from government about how we should cautiously cwtch. So I think it's perfectly normal in these uncertain times to not quite know how to react. So I think in some ways we do have to relearn almost how to be comfortable in these kind of closer quarters with other people.
When I couldn't cwtch my mum, I felt sad. I felt disconnected from my family. I felt very isolated. And I think I depended on my husband and my children a lot more for cwtches. And I have to say, the boys who are aged 14 and 17, they had to get used to me having to squish them out because I wasn't getting it anywhere else. Is that normal? And how beneficial is a hug that I was missing it so much from doing that with my sister, my mum and my niece?
I think it's enormously beneficial. I mean, there's a vast amount of research which shows that it can, reduce our stress hormone cortisol. It can increase, oxytocin, the so-called love hormone, and just generally make us feel, physically and emotionally better. There's even kind of emerging research which shows that it kind of helps this sense of what some of the scientists call social safety, this idea that we feel protected, and that could even make us healthier in kind of biological ways, strengthening the immune system, for example. So there's many benefits of physical touch and contact. And of course, particularly in our culture where, handshakes and hugs were the norm. Granted, we wouldn't go up and hug random strangers, but I think, it's been particularly difficult for those who were and are still isolated. Maybe they live alone, maybe they haven't been able to have that. So I think fortunately many of us have been able to kind of compensate, with those in our household. But I think, when it's safe to do so, we need to get back to that. There's been talk amongst some in the public health and medical community, we should do away with the handshake, that, this would reduce our, incidence of flu in future years and other, viral diseases. But of course, we're also losing things by not having that kind of casual physical contact with others. Of course, the big question, as you mentioned just now, is now the right moment? And that seems to be really dividing opinion at the moment.
Let's talk about handshakes, because I think that shows that the level of the commitment of the friendship, the level of commitment of a business deal. I just feel that the elbow is kind of like a jokey, polite, and it's right for now. But going forward in the future, that physical bond that you get when you actually physically shake on something, I mean, I don't think there's anything else out there that can replace that feeling that you have when you meet somebody for the first time.
Yeah, and certainly not in the short term. I mean, of course, these effectively social rituals that in some way or another symbolize trust, or they symbolize kind of connection to another person. And there's a lot of interesting history around the handshake, and the hug of being this sign of, I'm not going to harm you in this kind of, scenario where, because we're embracing, I don't have a weapon, or I'm not going to, kind of come at you in an aggressive way. And so, yeah, there's centuries of history behind these social rituals. So it is hard to replace them in a matter of months. And I think, people have found that. And I think, where we now are in an instance where we're easing and kind of integrating a little more, we are going to have these moments of not quite knowing how to act. And I think you're right, some of these less contact-based gestures haven't really, and we saw that. I mean, in the early stages, there was quite a lot of enthusiasm in a weird way about Zoom parties and socials and getting together virtually, and I think we quickly saw that was seen to be not a substitute for being in people's contact.